In the winter of 1942, a cold wind dragged across a remote Soviet proving ground as a small group of American military observers stepped out of their transport trucks. They had traveled thousands of miles to see something the Soviets insisted was unlike anything the Americans had encountered before. The officers had already seen dozens of tanks throughout their careers, from experimental prototypes to the familiar Sherman models rolling off U.S. assembly lines. But the moment they walked toward a squat, angular silhouette parked alone in the snow, they understood this machine was different. The Soviet mechanic who accompanied them didn't speak much English, but he tapped the tank's hull with his glove and said only, "This one lives." The Americans exchanged glances. The vehicle looked crude, even ugly. The armor plates were sloped, rivetless, almost brutishly welded. The turret sat slightly off-center. It had none of the polish or industrial neatness that American crews associated with a reliable machine. Yet the longer they stared, the more they sensed something unusual beneath its rough exterior. This was the T-34, the tank that had already begun rewriting the rules on the Eastern Front. When the Soviets invited the Americans to test it, they expected to impress them. What they didn't expect was how profoundly it would challenge everything the visitors thought they knew about tank design. As soon as the tests began, the first great secret of the T-34 revealed itself. The Americans fired a series of rounds at the tank's frontal armor. The shots ricocheted, not because the armor was thick, it wasn't, but because of the steep angle. The Soviets had sloped their armor plates so sharply that even a thin sheet behaved like heavy armor. What should have been weak protection became, through simple geometry, shockingly effective. An American officer muttered, "This defies everything in the manual." Another wrote in his notebook, "45 millimeters should be easy to penetrate, yet our shells slide off like water." For years, American and most European designers treated armor as a question of thickness alone. More steel meant more protection, but the Soviets had taken the opposite approach. Same material, different angle, exponentially better performance. It was a revelation, and it was only the first. When the engine compartment was opened, the Americans expected to see a conventional gasoline engine, perhaps a variation of something they already used. Instead, they found a massive V2 diesel engine, something they had considered too impractical or too heavy for tanks. Yet here it was, compact, powerful, and astonishingly robust. Diesel was far less flammable than gasoline, making T-34s much less likely to explode when hit. Sherman crews joked grimly that their tanks lit up like cigarette lighters. The T-34, on the other hand, rarely erupted in flames. It could take hits, keep its crew alive, and keep moving. One American mechanic whispered, "Why didn't we think of this first?" No one had an answer. Then came the mobility tests. The Soviets drove the T-34 into mud pits, snowdrifts, frozen ruts, and thick forest tracks with brutal confidence. Each time the tank clawed its way out. The secret this time was the Christie suspension, a system so advanced for its era that its full potential wouldn't be matched in Western designs for decades.
With massive road wheels and long travel suspension, the T-34 didn't just roll, it sprinted across terrain where other tanks bogged down or snapped axles. When the tank bounced over a snow-covered ridge, landing hard yet continuing without complaint, an American captain simply said, "This thing behaves like it wants to survive." And that was the essence of the T-34, survival through simplicity. The Americans noticed something else during their inspection. The tank was shockingly easy to maintain. There were no delicate systems requiring specialized training, no overly complex electronics, no unnecessary components installed for comfort or appearance. Everything inside had a single purpose: fighting. Crews could repair the tracks with hand tools. The engine could be pulled out in the field. The transmission, though stiff, was accessible. It was a tank built not for perfection, but for production. Built for a war of attrition. Built for a nation fighting for its life. One U.S. observer wrote, "This vehicle can be kept running by men with no technical training. Ours cannot." This difference alone may decide battles. It was not a compliment to American industry. As the testing concluded, the Americans compiled their formal evaluations. They criticized the T-34's uncomfortable interior, its crude optics, the limited visibility, the difficult steering. They noted the crew conditions were harsh, bordering on punishing. Yet alongside every criticism stood an undeniable truth. The tank worked. It worked when broken. It worked when freezing. It worked when shot. It worked because it was designed for the realities of war, not the ideals of engineers. The Americans could not deny what they had seen. On the drive back, one general summed up what they all felt. "This tank is not built for soldiers who expect to go home after the war," he said quietly. "It is built for soldiers who expect to fight until the very end." And perhaps that was the heart of the T-34's power. It was a machine forged in desperation, in sacrifice, in the raw determination of a nation refusing to die. It didn't need to be comfortable. It didn't need to be beautiful. It needed to win. And so it did. Against odds that seemed impossible, against an enemy that believed itself unstoppable, the T-34 became the iron backbone of an army that pushed the Wehrmacht back, village by village, field by field, until the tide of war finally turned. The Americans left the proving ground that day with a new understanding. Sometimes greatness lies not in innovation, but in simplicity. Not in perfection, but in purpose. The T-34 was far from flawless, but it was exactly the tank the war required. And for that reason it became a legend, not polished, not elegant, but enduring. A tank that lived.